Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle O'Neill. Thank you for joining me. I hope that I'm doing this right. I'm not real sure. This is the first time I've ever done a virtual speech like this on a stage, a virtual stage. So I hope I'm doing it right. Thank you for joining me. You know, whenever I was a child, I had this monster under the bed. And he was purple, kind of a light lavender purple, and very furry, extremely furry. And he had big, wide shoulders and really long, gnashy teeth. He had a very pointy nose, and it was a he. I don't know how I knew that, but it was a he. He hid under the bed, and whenever I would try to go to sleep, as soon as the lights were out, he would make a noise. He would make the bed creak, or he would make a noise on the other side of the room, even though I couldn't see him. He would gnash his teeth, and he would stick his arm out of under the bed. And I was very, very scared of this monster under the bed. And I would holler for my mom or my dad to come and take care of the monster under the bed. Well, my dad developed, after a few times of having to come in and fight this monster, you know, they would come in and they would turn on the lights, and of course the monster was gone because you couldn't see him in the daylight. You couldn't see him when it was light. You could only see this monster under the bed in the dark. Well, after a few times of doing this and coming in and turning on the light and reassuring me that there wasn't a monster under the bed, even though I knew there was, my dad developed Monster Spray. Monster Spray was this spray in a bottle with a little cap on it, and he would spray it under the bed before we would turn the light off. And magically, the monster would be gone. It was magic. It was magic monster fighting potion. Now, I'm sure that you have figured out, like I figured out later in life, that the monster spray was really water. And my dad was just doing something to assuage my fear so that I would go to sleep. And this went on for quite a while until I got to a point where I no longer was afraid of the monster under the bed. What did your monster under the bed look like? Was he in living color? Did you imagine that monster under the bed in vibrant colors and in great detail? Did you believe that the monster under the bed was real? But now we know as adults that the monster, even though we thought that that monster was this great, big, furry, teeth-gnashing, nasty guy, now we know that the monster was really just all made up in our head. We know that the monster was something that we created. It was a fear that we created in our own head, much like adult fears that we have now. What are some things that you are afraid of? Now, don't be silly. I'm not talking about things that we legitimately should be afraid of. I'm talking about the difference between danger, real, live danger, and fear. Fear is something that is an emotion. Fear is an emotion that you feel, that you think is real, and maybe you even have a physical reaction to the emotion. Danger is something where you legitimately need to be afraid of it. There are legitimate dangers in this world, and that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about these monsters under the bed when you were a child and what that turns into now that we're all grown up and we're adults. Fear is a emotion that we have that we react to a perceived event that is happening. We may have a physical reaction. We may get breathless. Our heart rate may go up. We may feel like running. We may get an adrenaline boost. Or you may have an emotional reaction. Now, some people react to fear differently than others. Some people react to fear by running towards the fear. They may be thrill seekers or fear seekers who run towards the fear. I'm in Texas, and in Texas, we have a lot of tornadoes. So in this part of the world with tornadoes, there are people that are tornado chasers, and they actually have trucks that are outfitted with equipment. And when there's tornado weather in this part of the world, they get in their trucks and they drive towards the storm. Those are thrill seekers. Those are people who seek out fear. There's others of us that when we experience fear, we run and hide. We run and hide in a corner, find a place that we feel secure, and stay there until the fear passes. Which are you? Which am I? I think that we can be different fear seekers or fear fearers depending on what the fear is. I do a lot of public speaking, and one day someone asked me, aren't you afraid of public speaking? Aren't you afraid to get up on that stage and talk to people and tell people things about you and your life and your experiences? And I said, of course I'm afraid. Of course I'm afraid. But that's okay. You can still experience what you want to experience. You can still move forward with these things that you want to do, even if you're afraid. And in this talk, I'm going to tell you 7 ways, 7 steps to overcoming fear. My mama had fears. Whenever I was growing up, my mama was afraid of a lot of things. For those of you that don't know me, I've written a book called Wisdom from Mama, and it's available on Amazon. And it's about all the different wisdoms that Mama taught me. Well, one of the things that Mama taught me was about fear. Even though she had all these fears, one of her fears, for example, was she had a fear of being on the first floor of a building or a house or an apartment. And so her fear was that if she lived or slept on the first floor of a house or an apartment, that somebody might break into the house through the windows. So all of my life, my mama collected bottles, antique bottles, glass bottles, all kinds of glass bottles, antique glass bottles, new glass bottles, whatever glass bottles she could find. And she would line them up in the windowsills of the windows of the first floor of our houses. And that way, when she went to sleep, she knew that if somebody was going to come in, she would hear it because the glass would fall and break. And that was just one of her fears. But whenever she was raising me, Mama taught me to reject fear. She taught me to not have fear. And she did this in a very systematic and intentional way. I remember one thing that I was afraid of. Whenever I was in junior high, I wanted to try out for cheerleader. And I was very afraid to try out for cheerleader. I didn't think that I had the ability and to do it well enough to make cheerleader, but I wanted to try out for cheerleader so badly. So she asked me, what are they going to do? Take away your birthday? Well, no, just because I don't make cheerleader, I still will have a birthday. Well, then what are you afraid of? She asked. I said, well, I'm afraid they're going to make fun of me. I'm afraid the kids at school are going to laugh at me. And she says, okay, so what? What if they do? Well, I'm afraid that they'll make fun of me forever. And we went through this with several different questions until she said, you know what? At the end of the day, you're not a cheerleader now. And if you don't try out for cheerleader, you won't be a cheerleader. But if you try out and you win, then you will be a cheerleader. Well, that was logic. I mean, I couldn't argue with that logic. But what I didn't tell her was that being cheerleader was really part of the scenario that I had in my head, that George, this boy in school in junior high, who was a star football player, and me, Michelle, as the cheerleader, would fall in love, get married someday, and live happily ever after. That was my fear, that I wanted to be cheerleader so that this boy would like me. And I was afraid if I failed at being cheerleader, he wouldn't like me and he would never like me and my life would be ruined. And in junior high, you know, your life can be ruined with a lot of little things. So I practiced, I did my jumps. And back then, you really didn't have to have any qualifications to try out for cheerleader. You just showed up one day, and you knew the cheers, and you knew how to do some of the jumps, and you show up and you try out. So I practiced the jumps. I showed up one day, and I tried out. Well, unfortunately, the tryouts were in the auditorium of my school. And back then, the auditoriums were designed to carry sound. So what I did, we had to do a cartwheel out onto the stage. Well, before I went out there, I peeked out there, and George, the love of my life, was sitting front and center. Oh dear, okay. I can do this. You can do this. Do a cartwheel, then a cheerleader jump. So I do the cartwheel. I apparently did it with my eyes closed. I open my eyes at the end of the cartwheel and I'm facing the back of the stage, which means that the rear of me is facing George. Well, I quickly do a hop and turn around, and lo and behold, George is sitting right there in the front, laughing hysterically at me. Or at least that's how I saw it. Maybe he really wasn't, but that's how I viewed it. I do a jump, we do our cheer, and off we go. Needless to say, I did not make cheerleader. I wanted to die. My world was ending. All of the junior high school child drama that you can imagine, I was feeling in that very moment. I went home. Mama came and picked me up. I went home, and she let me wallow for just a little while. She didn't believe in wallowing for very long. So she let me wallow for just a little while. And then she said, okay, you didn't make cheerleader. What else are you going to do? And we had to talk about refocusing my life plan. I tell you all of that not to tell you that George was a terrible person, or even that I married George and lived happily ever after, because I didn't. I did eventually go on a date or two with George, and he is a very nice man. Even to this day, he's a nice guy. But that was not meant to be. That was a good life lesson in things that are meant to be and things that are not meant to be. But what my mama taught me in that moment was this pattern and this process of overcoming fear. And I want to share that pattern with you today. There are 5 patterns of fears. The way that we feel fear, the way that we view fear, there are 5 patterns. One is we imagine the worst possible scenario. The worst possible scenario is that I'm not going to make cheerleader and I will never get married or fall in love again. Worst possible scenario. The second fear pattern is over catastrophizing. Say that 10 times twice. 10, 10 times real fast. Over catastrophizing. That's where you imagine not just the worst scenario, but the absolute craziest, most impossible thing that could ever possibly horribly happen as a result of your fear. So over catastrophizing would be imagining that monster under the bed is going to come out and rah, and cut me up with his sharp claws and gnash me with his teeth and kill me. That's over catastrophizing. The third fear pattern is intellectual resistance. Intellectual resistance. In other words, you fear something, so you give in and you don't even try it. Like if you had the opportunity to go parasailing and you're afraid of parasailing, you're afraid of heights, you're afraid of whatever, and so you just don't even try it. You don't even think through your fears to whether that is a logical fear or an illogical fear, whether there's a true danger or not a true danger. And you don't even go try parasailing. I have to tell you, I was afraid of parasailing. And then I tried it. And oh my gosh, parasailing is so much fun. The fourth fear pattern, automatic thoughts. This is where somebody tells you that you're supposed to be afraid of something and you're on autopilot. You don't even give it another thought. You just assume that you are. A lot of times we get these autopilot fears from family or friends or peers. And so like an example of an autopilot thought would be that my dad had a fear of heights. And he would always, if we were going to do something interesting, he wouldn't do it because he was scared of heights. And so therefore I thought automatically that I'm supposed to be scared of heights. And so I wouldn't do things that involved heights, like parasailing. But when you push past that autopilot thought process to decide for yourself whether you fear it or not, then you can work past it and move on. The fifth fear pattern is visualization. This is where you imagine the fear in bright color, or as we might say, in technicolor. This is where you envision every detail of that scary monster under the bed. You imagine the color. Like I said, he was lavender, not just purple, but a lavender purple. You imagine the fur that he has, that he's grown all this fur. You imagine his long claws. You imagine his long gnashy teeth and his very pointy nose. You imagine how tall he is and what he looks like because he glows in the dark. You imagine that fear in Technicolor. Richard Bandler, who developed the concept of neuro-linguistic programming, he actually is a speaker at this conference right after I finish. So those of you who are looking for somebody to watch at 5 o'clock, go watch Richard Bandler. So, and I promise he was in this talk before I knew that he was speaking after me. But Richard Bandler, the founder of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP for short, he basically teaches how to control your mind and change your fears. He teaches techniques like imagining a very, very well-known technique. If you are afraid of public speaking, what do people tell you to do? Imagine the audience in their underwear so that then they look just like you and they're less intimidating. So when you get up there to speak and you imagine the audience in their underwear, then you're not afraid of them anymore. That is a very simplistic example of retraining that fear in your mind to look like something else that you're not scared of. Another thing that he teaches is to imagine your fear as a cartoon, a silly cartoon with silly music that's playing as the cartoon is going. And then you won't be afraid of it anymore. So if you think of parasailing, imagine parasailing as a silly cartoon with silly cartoon music, and then you won't be afraid of it. Imagine that monster under the bed, and imagine him as a cartoon, kind of like what we now have as Monsters Inc., although that wasn't around whenever I was a child. Now we have Monsters Inc., and we imagine those monsters under the bed as a cartoon with silly music and silly voices, and suddenly they're not anything to fear anymore. 7 steps to overcoming your fears. So what we've done now is we've defined what fears are as opposed to dangers. We've talked about rejecting our fear. We want to reject our fears so that they don't hold us back from achieving our full potential. And we've talked about the 5 types or patterns of fears so that when you're feeling one of these fears, you can identify it. Now let's shift and talk about the 7 steps to overcoming your fear of the monster under the bed, or whatever your fear is. The first step, what are you really afraid of? What are you really afraid of? You know, when I was trying out for cheerleader, I wasn't really afraid that everybody in the school would laugh at me. I wasn't really afraid of even what those other people thought of me. What I was afraid of, what I was really afraid of, is that my life would be ruined because this one boy wouldn't like me. I was really afraid of the judgment of one person. When you're experiencing a fear, ask yourself why 5 times. In other words, each succession, ask why. Ask yourself, why am I afraid of parasailing? Why? And the answer might be, well, I might die. Well, why does parasailing make you think you're going to die? Because there might be equipment failure. Well, have you asked the company if they have checked the equipment, what their process is for checking the equipment? Why are you afraid that this company who has parasailed with all these other people suddenly wouldn't check the equipment for your flight? Well, I'm afraid that they'll make a mistake. Why? So ask yourself, keep asking yourself that why until you get down to the very root, that little bitty thing that's hiding way in here that identifies your fear. This is a process of self-evaluation. So then you can figure out, am I really legitimately afraid of this? Or is my fear something that is holding me back in an illogical way? Second step to overcoming fear. What is the worst thing that could happen? Ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen? If you fail at being a cheerleader, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're not a cheerleader. If you fail at starting that new business, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to lose money. You're going to be broke. Well, you were probably broke to start with. You're going to get eaten by the monster under the bed. What is the worst thing that could happen? Now, you have to put a filter on these worst things, right? Because like we were talking about in the patterns of fear, you have to be cognizant that you're not over catastrophizing these worst outcomes. So apply a filter to that and make sure that they're reasonable outcomes to the fear. At the end of the day, if you can live with the consequences of the thing that you fear, then you need to go for it. You know, at the end of the day, I wasn't a cheerleader. I went on to become a very successful lawyer. I went on to marry a very wonderful man. So all of those things that I feared as a junior high school child, that I was going to ruin my entire life, none of that was real. None of that was realistic. And so the thing that I feared from failure was unrealistic. As my mama said, are they going to take away your birthday? No. Are you going to die? No. Well, then go for it. Because the key to success is failing forward, continuing to try and try again until you succeed. Third step to overcoming fear, ask yourself, what is the best thing that could happen? What is the best outcome if you do the thing that you fear? So instead of thinking of all the negative consequences, think of the positive consequences. If I start that business, what if I succeed? If I start that Instagram channel and post about my makeup techniques, what if I succeed? If I go parasailing and I don't die and the equipment doesn't fail, will that be fun? Will it be fun to try something new? Will it be a new experience? What are the great outcomes that could come from success? This is a place where you can dream big. You can think past just the consequences tomorrow of success or the next day, and you can think 5 or 10 years down the road. If my business succeeds, what are the great things that could happen? Fourth step to overcoming fear. What is it that you have control over? What are the steps to success in this thing that you fear that you can control? Can you control your planning, your preparation? Can you control, if you're starting a business, can you control your expenses and keep them low so that when you get money in the door, that it goes farther and it contributes to your success? What are the things that you can control? If you're giving a public speech to a virtual audience like this, what are the things that are in your control? Testing the equipment, making sure that the lighting works well, practicing your speech, knowing what you're going to say. All of those things are things that are within your control. So out of all of the good and the bad outcomes, what are things that you can control about those outcomes? If nothing else, at a minimum, you can control your thoughts. You can control your thoughts and have a positive mental attitude about the thing that you want to achieve. The next step to overcoming fear. What is it that you have zero control over? Go through the process and think of the things about which you cannot change. There are going to be things that you cannot change. There are many, many, many of us that probably all of us didn't expect to be in a pandemic right now. We didn't have any foreseeability that our country would virtually shut down in March of 2020. When I was planning my goals for 2020 on December 31st of 2019, I didn't write in there in March, plan for a shutdown in a pandemic that's going to last most of the year. That is something that is completely out of our control. All we can do is exist and do the best we can with the things that we can control and free ourselves from the worry and the stress and the expenditure of energy on things that are out of our control. The next step to overcoming fear. If not control, are there things that you can influence? If you can't control the absolute outcome of something, can you influence it? Can you do a better job preparing? Can you do a better job planning? Can you practice? Can you save money? Can you make sure that you start your business with sufficient reserves in the bank? What are the things that you can influence if you can't control them? And the last step is just simply take massive action. The last step to overcoming your fear is to just, I imagine it in my mind. I take that fear and I imagine a shoebox. I'm a girl. I'm well known for my shoes among my friends. I have plenty of shoeboxes. I imagine one of my empty shoeboxes, and I take that fear of public speaking, the fear of doing a virtual presentation that I've never done like this before, the fear of walking onto a main stage in LA where we were supposed to be. All of those fears, I imagine taking them, and all the fears that are in between me and what I want to accomplish, what I want to achieve. I take all of those fears and I stuff them in this shoebox, and I put the lid on the shoebox. And I put the shoebox up on this imaginary shelf in my brain. And I say, shoebox, I'll get back with you later. In the meantime, I'm going to go give this speech on this big stage in LA, or on this big Zoom from Texas to LA. And I'm going to go do what I want to do, the things I want to achieve, in spite of those fears in the shoebox that are up on the shelf. At the end of the day, if you get up, you dress up, and you show up, and you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, you may fail. You will be failing forward because you will be pushing past your fear. You will be pushing toward your goals and not letting your fears hold you back. And if you fail, get up, dust yourself off, and try again. After all, life is not a pond of mosquitoes. Now, if y'all are from the South, you know about mosquitoes, right? Imagine if you're sitting in a stagnant pond that's just breeding mosquitoes, and you don't have any mosquito spray, and those mosquitoes are just biting at you, having their lunch. They're having a lunch party, and they're wearing their fascinator hats, and they're biting and biting and biting at you. And you're scared to get up and go find another pond, because after all, the next pond might have more mosquitoes. It might be a worse pond, but it might be a better pond, and it might be a pond that doesn't have mosquitoes. So it's your job to live, to love, to learn, to grow, to experience life. Your job is not to just sit there in the pond of mosquitoes biting your rear because you're scared to go find the other pond of mosquitoes. One of the biggest lessons that Mama taught me is this saying, and I hope that you will take this with you wherever you're going next. Fear is a useless emotion. Fear is an emotion, and fear is a useless emotion. Mama taught me not to believe in fear. I teach the young women that I mentor now not to believe in fear. Fear stagnates you like that stagnant pond of mosquitoes. Fear paralyzes you. Fear holds you back from the greatness that God designed each of us to be. Fear is a useless emotion. It's an emotion like sadness or happiness or anger or joy, and we each get to control our emotions. You get to choose how you feel. You get to choose to be angry. You get to choose to be sad. You get to choose fear. And all of those emotions are legitimate. emotions for us to express in an appropriate time. But as with all emotions, they have a shelf life, and you shouldn't sit around and wallow in the emotions forever. Fear is a useless emotion. Everything you want, everything you dream, everything you desire lies on the other side of your fears. Learning how to deal with your fears, learning how to face your fears, and learning how to move through your fears and take that action in spite of those fears in the shoebox on the shelf. That is essential to achievement of your goals and your dreams. It is essential to you becoming the best you that you know that you want to be. What is it that you've dreamed of doing? And what are the monsters under the bed that are holding you back? I would encourage you to get out your little bottle of Monster Spray that we have virtually talked about today. Your 7 steps to overcoming fear in this virtual little pretend spray bottle, and spray those monsters with the Monster Spray so that they get in the shoebox and they get on the shelf and they stop holding you back from those things that you desire to do. Tell fear it doesn't live here anymore, and go work towards your wildest dreams. I'm Michelle O'Neill. I hope you've enjoyed my talk. I hope that I've given you some things that you can take and implement in your daily life. I hope that you will remember not to let the monsters under the bed keep you back from doing those things that you want to achieve. I hope that you will remember Mama said, fear is a useless emotion. Please go visit my booth. There is a download available in my booth with the 7 steps to overcoming fear. There is also a promotion for the next group coaching session that I'm doing via Zoom virtually on the 6 areas of business, how to blaze your business for success in the 6 areas that are key to a business. Those areas: planning, operations, finances, marketing, sales, and leadership. And over 6 sessions, over 12 weeks, basically every other Friday at 3 o'clock via Zoom, I'm going to go through those 6 areas to blaze your business to success. There's a discount code that I'm offering for attendees of this expo. So if you're interested in that, go check that out. Check out my website, www.michellemay.o'neill.com, and use the discount code to register for that group session. Don't let fear hold you back. Use the Monster Spray and spray the monster, because fear is a useless emotion.